So the problem that we'd solve is there are too many scans and not enough radiologists to interpret those scans and give those results. And that's the bit of the pathway that we're aiming to try and improve. We had worked in the NHS where there are values, but I would say that most people in the NHS aren't entirely sure what those values are. We've already found AI has helped us quite considerably. And I think thinking about the service may be the thing that protects us. But I think you can never be sure. So you've always just got to stay alert.
You're not ordinary. No 9 to 5, meetings about meetings, or compulsory corporate team building for you. Your business is extraordinary, and you need an extraordinary bank. From pre-seed to IPO and beyond, HSBC Innovation Banking offers VC-backed tech and life science businesses custom solutions, co-created by actual industry experts and delivered by a dedicated team you can call whenever you need. Discover extraordinary at hsbcinnovationbanking.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the UKTM podcast, your weekly chat with some of the movers and shakers of the UK tech industry. And this is a very exciting episode because we are going video, VODs, video podcasting. We're giving it a go. And this is our first attempt. It's the Spotlight episode. And I'm delighted to say that for that very first episode, I am joined by Dr. Farzana Rahman. Welcome, Farzana.
Thank you for having me.
And Farzana, you're the head, the CEO and the co-founder of Hexarad. And I would normally explain what Hexarad does, but as you're here, it would come so much better if you explained it.
So we exist to unlock diagnosis, and our mission is fast and accurate diagnosis for everyone, everywhere. So we have a radiology platform and we help patients get their diagnosis for scans such as CTEs and MRIs. And we've helped more than 2 million patients do that.
And before we get talking about what you do at Hexarad, let's talk about you. You didn't become a founder to start with. You were a doctor. Did you start off wanting to be a doctor, or did you always harbour secret ambitions to be an entrepreneur?
Growing up, I didn't even really know what the word entrepreneur was. I think I was too old for that period where everyone left university and knew they wanted to work in the startup. But no, I always wanted to be a doctor. And it was really becoming a doctor and then a junior doctor. I met my co-founders, Jay, Amy and Sam, when we were radiology registrars at St George's Hospital in London. And at St George's Hospital, it's a major trauma centre. So when you're on call for radiology overnight, then first of all, you can't sleep. And second of all, there are two of you because it's really busy. And that was when we started talking about some of the problems that we were seeing. I mean, it's well over a decade ago now, and how we might try and solve them.
And what were those problems that you saw? What were the things that really made you think this needs a better solution?
So what we're seeing around the world is the demand for diagnostics and scanning in particular has just exponentially increased. Patients are getting older, there are different diseases, and medicine has changed, so you need more and more tests. And what we could see even back then was that the demand far outstripped the supply. And it kind of comes to when you need a scan. So you'll see that patients now, there are waiting lists going on for months for patients to get their scan. But the bit of the pathway we're involved in is after the scan, getting that result. And again, there are big backlogs and delays. So the problem that we'd solve is there are too many scans and not enough radiologists to interpret those scans and give those results. And that's the bit of the pathway that we're aiming to try and improve.
And it feels as if there's an awful lot of people out there with healthcare solutions for various issues within the NHS and beyond. What is it about technology you think that can really kind of change the way that we go about kind of making health services more efficient and work better for patients?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's being really granular about, number one, as you asked, like, what the problem is we're trying to solve, and then understanding the nuances within healthcare. The workflows are really complex. And so before you add tech, and tech is just not a panacea, you can't put a bandage on it. You need to really look at that workflow and understand, like, where could you make efficiencies and where could tech improve things meaningfully? Because everything in healthcare is interesting. Everything is potentially something that could be improved. But I think the trick is to understand where is the most impact. And part of that is really going down into the weeds, understanding workflows, where you're going to improve things.
So you came up with a solution. You all came together to form a startup. How important was it to have that kind of team behind you? And what did you all come with kind of the same expertise, or did you spread out the expertise? Because I'm guessing that even if you had the solution, you might not necessarily have known what technology was going to solve that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we got really lucky with was that even though we were all doctors, we all did other things. So I have another degree in health economics. I did policy and strategy work. Amy was an editor at the BMJ. Jay had set up businesses, and Sam was an oil trader in the city for 10 years, got bored, then went back to medical school and became a doctor. And so fast forward a few years, all of those skills came in really useful. But Sam in particular, as part of his previous career, he used to build these really complex financial models using this complex logic. And radiology is quite complex. There's a lot of logistics. And we used his logic to really form the foundations of what would then go on to be our technology. And so Tim, our CTO, joined really early on, just as soon as we raised our first investment round. And so he could take some of that logic and then use his technology brain and work with Sam and also Jay to then build the tech. So for us, it was definitely having some of the kind of broader knowledge, but also being specific about the problems. And then Tim added a huge amount. We couldn't have done it without him.
And how have you found that changing? Because as a company grows and expands, you take on more people. Did you have a kind of a set of values that you lived by, that you still live by as you expand? What was the culture like for you, and how important was that?
Yeah, it was really important. And we knew even when we started out that getting culture right would be really important. But it's really difficult to really know how to do that. And so we have 6 values. They've been our values from the beginning, and I won't bore you by going through them. But early on, we had worked in the NHS where there are values, but I would say that most people in the NHS aren't entirely sure what those values are, like that are corporate wise. But they would talk about patient care and the importance of high quality. But we wanted to make our value something that everyone knew. So we have an exercise we do called Living the Value. So we do it now before any big meeting, any team meeting. Someone will talk about how someone else or themselves have lived one of our values that week. When we first started, it felt a bit naff. There were like 6 people, you just start this meeting. But actually, as we've grown, we found that's really important, because when new people start, they'll join some meetings in that first week and they'll see people shouting each other out for the value. So then it's really about, how do you take that abstract word and what does that look like in practice at Hexarad? So we found that exercise, for example, has been really helpful.
And when you're working with the NHS, I mean, for a lot of people, it's one big organisation, but the reality is it's broken down into lots of trusts. It's an organisation that I would say is quite conservative, quite bureaucratic, but also quite open to change, because, it needs to always be looking to the future and looking to new ways to do things. So how was it getting into the NHS and working with them?
Like anything, it had its hard bits and its good bits. The good thing about working with the NHS is everyone is really mission driven. Patients are the centre to everything. And I think what's really interesting is that's not just for the people who see the patients, not just the clinical staff, but whether it's your IT folk or your finance folk, if it comes to patient care, then everything is prioritised to improve that. So I think that is, it's an honour to be able to support the NHS and people who are delivering that. So, that's a real privilege. I think, it does also have its difficulties. You have to contract with each hospital. The average hospital has a budget often of nearly £1 billion a year. So they're big organisations, but there's a lot of process. There might be a will for certain things, for example, innovation or technology, but there's not always the budget. There's not always an easy route to procurement or getting that contract. The people on the ground are often not the ones making that decision or driving that forward, even though they're the ones who know what's needed the most. So, I think at times it can certainly be challenging and can sometimes feel attritional.
And how big a part does budget play? Because that's all we hear about from as members of the public, is that the NHS needs more money. The NHS doesn't have enough money. The amounts of money needed to kind of get the NHS back up and running efficiently are vast. So I should imagine that's sort of difficult for startups as well, trying to pitch into the NHS.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can be really, really difficult. I mean, at the moment, we're just seeing tremendous pressure across both primary and secondary care. Hospitals are under a lot of pressure to reduce their costs and to find cost savings. So I'd say, yeah, at the moment, budget is a real pinch point. But the other thing with the NHS is that it has this kind of productivity issue. So the data demonstrates that the NHS has not gotten back to its pre-COVID levels of productivity. And so that just remains a challenge across the board that I think decision makers are really trying to solve. But it can be really difficult. And I think COVID really pushed the morale of staff. It was a really tough time for people on the ground. And so perhaps that's what we're seeing now, is the kind of repercussions of that.
And we'll talk about your funding journey in a minute, but talk me through then what you're offering in terms of an actual case. So a patient that comes to hospital with an issue which will need a scan, what is it that your technology enables to happen better for that patient?
So we've built a platform that integrates with hospitals. And if a patient comes in either in the middle of the night or they've had, a scan booked for weeks and they've come in, and if the hospital needs our support, our platform automatically, as soon as a scan is done, and we've got some preset rules, automatically pulls that scan across. It kind of enters into our system, and we have people and technology that then delivers that result of that scan, and that automatically then gets sent back. And we do that thousands of times a day. And so we've done that, and we've built a lot of technology to make that process as efficient as possible. Integrating with a hospital, moving that much data, it requires a fair bit of technical expertise. We've certainly done that. And then the other product that we have, which we built, was we realized that a lot of the technology that we had built for ourselves would be really useful for the NHS. And so we have another product called OptiRad. So our primary business is called ReportRad. That's where the scans are getting reported. We have another product called OptiRad, which is software that helps radiology departments become more efficient. So we're trying to really tackle this problem holistically, that we need to give our partners tools to make them use their own resource better. And then we're almost like the grid. When they've got these surges, which they need help with, they can plug, we're already integrated, they can send us the work, and then we then get it done.
And how big a role does AI play in all of that?
So we have, AI for us is a fairly, big factor. So we have AI that is kind of implanted into all of our systems. So how the scans move across, how the scans get allocated. We have a few AI tools we built that improves the quality of reports. I think the future is really AI that can help a radiologist read the scan. And we've had some tools that have come out in the last few years. They haven't had the impact that people thought they would, but I think with the next generation of Gen AI, they will do. I think you'll always need a radiologist to look at the tricky cases and to sign off the report. But what you'd hope is that would then mean that we can, get through a lot more scans and we can get patients their diagnosis faster.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your funding journey. It's always a tricky one, isn't it? Raising those funds initially. Where are you in your journey, and how did you find it pitching this business in the initial instance?
Yeah, so we are, I suppose you would say that we are post Series B, but we're profitable. So we're a bit more in that kind of growth capital stage. And we've raised 3 rounds of investment. We raised our first round. I went to market in 2020, and it was really tough. We, got just rejection after rejection, more than 40 from
That's
investors. It's a lot. It's a lot of rejections. And I think at the time, what we saw was that when it came to healthcare, investors, all they really cared about was software as a service, SaaS. And our business is a tech-enabled service. And because we'd been on the ground, we knew that if we really wanted to scale something in the UK, we needed to own the service. We needed to take something off the plate of the people who we were serving. Everything's on fire in healthcare everywhere across the world. So you really need to do something that's going to put out a big fire. But investors were just not convinced of a tech-enabled service. They wanted software. And so trying to, tell that story was tough. But eventually we told that story. And so we raised first round, we did a follow-on. And then in 2024, we raised a growth round. And by that time we had scaled a lot more. We had done pretty well. So it was a completely different experience. But having been at both ends of that journey and raising money, I think my takeaway really is that you have to be, if you know the market and you believe in your vision, you can't let kind of what investors want to invest in necessarily always influence your roadmap, because now the big conversations investors have is like, is SaaS dead because of AI? Like, do we even look at these companies anymore? So it's kind of gone full circle. So yeah, it's been interesting and hard, but I think all founders have their own horror stories of rejection.
Yeah, and also that's a good point you make about the pivot, because for a lot of people, pivoting is kind of, well, you've got to pivot. If you see that something isn't working, you have to change it. But actually, sometimes you have to stick to your guns, because the pivot isn't, if you know what you're selling is right, don't be influenced by others. Did you get any specific advice? And can you kind of pass on any advice to others that might be listening that are on that journey or about to sort of start going out into the big bad world of pitching?
Yeah, I would say, of course, you always need to be able to pivot and you always need to be able to modify your product. But you have to be really careful about who you listen to and what you're asking them advice about. So, I had some brilliant, like not even mentors, I suppose, like friends who had been through that journey and who actually did, I suppose, do some mentoring. So when I would speak to them and they had been operators, they understood about the business, they understood the markets. When I spoke to them, they could completely see the vision. And I knew that was really important for me because they had done that before. So I would say, staying true to your vision and being very mindful of whose advice you're taking before you pivot. Like, are they the expert at the thing that you do? And I found by far like the most useful and people who've really helped me transform how I've thought have been people who've been on this journey before, other founders who've been a bit ahead of me. So I think find those people. I've tracked those people down. I got them to write angel checks. Even though, at the point that some of them came in, I didn't need the money from them because I had institutional backing, but it just meant I could pick up the phone and I could ask them about a sticky problem and they probably would have dealt with it before. A
lot of people talk about that community being really important. And that happened in Silicon Valley because Silicon Valley is small. Everybody was talking to each other and everybody in Silicon Valley was trying to set up a business. Do you think we can replicate that in the UK? Do you see that being replicated in the UK? And what are the sort of communities that have really helped you? I mean, if you're setting out as a founder, you don't necessarily know where other founders are, do you? So how do you sort of come together, as it were?
Yeah, I found that kind of peer network to be the most useful one of all. I mean, not even just for advice, but just for like commiseration, just to be like, I've had a really hard day. I had a really hard time. And someone saying, yeah, you thought that was hard. Guess what an investor said to me? It just makes you feel a bit better. I think I'm based in London. I think we have a decent scene. Mm-hmm. I'm part of Founders Forums, set up by like Carolyn Dawson and Brent Hoberman. And that's brilliant. Certainly probably the best network I've been part of. But I think there are different little pockets. And I think it's helpful also to have like kind of peers who are also adjacent to your industry as well. Other industries are super helpful, but people in your industry as well are really helpful. So I would say just, if you're going to conferences, you just get out there, you meet people. If you can't find them, just host your own event. And at every stage, there is always some kind of community or accelerator that you can probably like plug into, but don't give away your equity. Unless you absolutely have to. That's the other thing I'll say. So, yeah.
Good tip. Also, coping with rejection. I mean, you said that you'd had 40 rejections.
Yeah.
How do you bounce back from that? Because, that's a lot, isn't it? And I'm guessing that's in quite a short period of time, because if you're trying to raise money, you're doing this in quite a, one after the other fashion. So how did you sort of learn to sort of pick yourself up from those rejections and just get back out and do it without feeling very depressed about the whole thing?
I'm just really good at rejection. That's like honestly, I think is I'm really good at rejection. I think a lot of founders are. We've got quite thick skins. I'd had other experiences in life where I was a junior doctor, I was in my mid-20s. I didn't get a job. It was the first time I hadn't got something that I had tried to get. And at the time I thought it was an absolute disaster. But that was my first experience of really putting myself out there and not getting it. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I just realized that, I'm still here. I've still got the people I love around me. This really isn't that big a deal. And I suppose, years later when setting up the business, I have that same mindset, which is, in the scheme of life, this rejection is really not that important. And if you keep going, you will get there. And I knew, I'm an Asian female founder, we find it very difficult to get funding. So in my head, I was always I'm always just going to need to speak to more people than people who don't have my characteristics, because the odds are stacked against me. So I need to play the odds. So I think it's just, you just have to carry on. But also, I was at this conference on the West Coast a few years ago, and I was talking to the founder of HubSpot, right? multi-billion dollar company who, and he had already had a successful company before HubSpot. And he just told me all these rejection stories, even after his first, he had exited his first company. And so every founder, and people that you look up to, they've all got these same stories. I think, I was at that same conference. I think Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, right? Mm-hmm. Silicon Valley, God, he talked about the same thing, mm-hmm. all these rejections that he had gotten. So I think it's just part of the process.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned as well there that you're a woman, and an Asian woman, mm-hmm. and that makes, it even harder. The figures on women founders mm-hmm. are really poor, aren't they? Why is that, do you think?
Do you mean in terms of getting funding?
Yeah. Is it something like 2% of funded businesses are run by women, or women-only teams? I mean, it's shocking.
Yes. And you know what? So one of my, Sachin Agrawal, good friend, and he's an angel investor, wrote me a pretty big check in my first round. We did our masters together at LSE. And he said to me early on, that he's super data-driven. And he said to me early on that I've looked at the data and I've seen that female founders give better returns to their investors because generally they have some of the characteristics about being a bit more thoughtful, not taking, unnecessary risks. So he, in his private portfolio does actually invest a lot in female founders because first of all, he wants to support them, but also he's like, that's just good investment sense. So yeah, it's a shame that it doesn't necessarily translate because, if the job is to improve the fund and show decent returns, the data demonstrates that female founders do that. I think it's just it's just a shame and probably just indicative of just preset biases that people might have. Yeah, and often those biases are kind of quite subtle that you don't necessarily see, but are definitely replicated again and again.
When you mentioned, that you have a thick skin, which is probably something a doctor needs as well as a founder. And you talked about values, which is also another thing that doctors will have at their core as well as founders. Were there any other things that you learned from being a doctor, from that world that you brought to the world of founding? Yeah, for sure. So, just to paint a picture, when I became a junior doctor, which is now 20 years ago, on my first day as a junior doctor, you've gone to medical school, you do a bit of an induction, and then you're left at night, and stuff always happens on the hospital at night, it's really stressful. And within your first week, every junior doctor will be in front, I was in front of a patient who was coding, and I had to, a patient that was
coding, sorry. So they were arresting.
Oh, okay.
And so I had to kind of move really fast, take all the knowledge that I knew, use some first principles thinking, and just make decisions, move quickly, and take whatever knowledge I had in a highly stressful situation. That is exactly what it's like being a founder. I would say the risks are actually lower, the stakes are lower.
They're not life and death.
They're not life and death. But being able to do that using first principles, taking your training, making decisions, indecision is a decision. And I'll say one of the most important things for a founder is just to make a decision. You have to do all of that as a junior doctor. So that mindset of being thrown in at the deep end, and I don't know what it's like for junior doctors now, but for us, we would move around every 6 months and you turn up to hospital, you wouldn't even have a login for a hospital, for a system. You would just turn up, you'd be told you're starting nights, you wouldn't know how to log into the hospital system and you were just left to it. And so being able to deal with that degree of pressure and uncertainty, but risk stratify and make sensible decisions, all of those steps, I think, really helped. And now when in our team, we've hired a lot of junior doctors who've left medicine into non-medical roles. And they all have that quality, being able to deal with pressure and use first principles thinking.
That's really interesting. Maybe we need to send founders into hospitals to do some night shifts.
Yeah. They could. It is highly, highly stressful. I don't think, and that's the thing is that when you even on, I've talked about this with my co-founders, even on our worst days, we sit around and we say, but you know what? It's not as bad as our worst days in the hospital where somebody died.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about kind of setting up a business like this, do you have sort of long-term goals? Or are you very much in the short term?
Yeah, both, I think. So you have long-term goals because you need to, you're kind of steering towards something. So for us, our goal is at the moment is really in the UK and increasing our footprint, but eventually then going global. But you do need to also be very focused on the kind of short term. And then depending on what happens in the short term, you need to be prepared to then readjust your long-term goals. And
when you're thinking about that expansion then and thinking about the future, when will you know that it's right to kind of move into a different market? Because that will be very different from dealing with the NHS. The NHS is quite a unique kind of beast in many ways, isn't it? So if you went into Europe or America or wherever it might be, you'd be doing things very differently. Do you think you'll just have a sort of sense of when that time will be right?
Yeah, I think for now our focus is very much on the UK and increasing our footprint. And I think when we get to a certain market share, I think then it would be like really interesting to then look up. I think the NHS is very unique, but also has the same problems as every healthcare system in the world. So I think there are certainly a lot of interesting learnings to take. And I think healthcare systems in general are tricky. Even, I lived in the States for a while, and even there, like hospitals have 2 weeks of financial runway. People have the same messy processes, they have the same operational limitations. Sometimes there might be a bit more budget, but actually all budgets are always strained. So I think there are good learnings to take from the NHS overseas.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier that AI has kind of come along, disrupted everything. So software as a service, a lot of those companies are sort of potentially dead in the water. There's a lot of other niche projects that are coming out that are only going to last 6 months. And we're seeing the big tech companies rolling out changes at a huge rate. Does that concern you? I mean, how do you sort of, as a business that is in the AI space, are you worried about what is being developed by the big tech companies? Or do you think there's always going to be space for smaller niche players like yourself?
I think you're always making a mistake if you can ever make a statement like it will always be okay, right? I think that's your first mistake, because I think that's probably the mistake Nokia made before Steve Jobs made the iPhone. What do I think? I think the future is AI-enabled service. I think, being able to deliver an end-to-end service, taking the risk and the liability, helps, it is what people need, particularly in healthcare. And I think an AI-enabled versus tech-enabled service, I think, will be the future. Am I worried about what people roll out? Yes, I think maybe not in terms of as a business, but certainly just what it means for the future of society. When you think about AI, what does it mean for the future generations of like young people who are working? What does that look like? The CEO of Anthropic wrote an essay like in January, which is highly, highly, worrying about the misuse of AI. So, I think lots of things to think. I think from a business perspective, I think we've already found AI has helped us quite considerably. And I think thinking about the service may be the thing that protects us. But I think you can never be sure. So you've always just got to stay alert.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever had to sort of future gaze as much as we have in the last sort of few years. I was reading about a interesting scholarship that you run, the Hexarad scholarship. Should we talk a little bit about that before we finish?
Yeah, sure. So we set this up, when we were really small. We didn't have that much money. But for us, living our values is really important. So the scholarship is and one of the things that we saw, and this was after 2020 and Black Lives Matter, was that students from kind of ethnic minority and less privileged backgrounds, when they leave medical school, there's often a ceiling to where they progress in their specialties as a doctor. So we wanted to improve that for radiology. So we set this scholarship up. It's been going for 5 years now. And the winner gets like a cash prize. They get mentoring, they get publication, working on a project. And everyone else is also entitled to like mentoring as well. So it's a way, and it's probably like we do this event like once a year where we announce the winner. It's always my favorite event. And it's just a way of, I suppose, paying it forward. So none of us, me and my founders came from particularly privileged backgrounds. So for us, being able to do things like this is really important.
Well, it sounds like a great initiative. Okay, well, sadly, we've run out of time.
Thank you for having me.
I really enjoyed speaking to you. I think it's fascinating. Good luck with all you do.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody that's listened. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let us know what you think of our very first video cast. Don't forget to catch up with everything that UKTN writes on their website, and you can get in touch with me at Jane Wakefield with your comments and suggestions about the show. Until next time, it's goodbye from me. You're not ordinary. No 9 to 5, meetings about meetings, or compulsory corporate team building for you. Your business is extraordinary, and you need an extraordinary bank. From pre-seed to IPO and beyond, HSBC Innovation Banking offers VC-backed tech and life science businesses custom solutions, co-created by actual industry experts and delivered by a dedicated team you can call whenever you need. Discover extraordinary at hsbcinnovationbanking.co.uk.